Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. Welcome to Yidstock. If you're just arriving now, if you've been here for a while, more fun. It's a great pleasure to be sitting here with Anthony Mordecai Tzvi Russell, who's been at Yidstock before a number of years ago.
2018, I think it was.
Wow,
Yeah.
he knows. 2018 with Tzvi Breeder, his duo with Dimitri Gaskin. And this year they're back, augmented by, I hope that's not diminishing the, it's actually a musical term, augmented by two-thirds of the Bay Area trio Bimala. So that's Sunday, tomorrow at 3 p.m. You won't want to miss that. So Anthony and I are going to have a conversation for a while, and then towards the end we'll open the floor to a couple of questions. So Anthony.
Yes.
Yeah, good to see you back here.
Good to see you too.
Yeah.
Here we are.
And what you been up to? How did you? What was your pandemic years like?
Oh my goodness. A lot. I want to say that to a certain extent, I feel like I'm responsible for everything that's happened in the past 2.5 years.
Wow.
Because in the very last week of 2019, I opened up a Word document and I wrote 2020 big moves. And I didn't go so. There were no big moves in 2020. I don't know what to tell you. But I thought maybe we would start this conversation with a short film that I made for a project I was a part of called Fenster. It was based out of Canada, and it was for Jews of color who were artists and creatives. So they asked us to make a little introductory film about ourselves, and this is the one that I made about myself, but a lot of things that you'll see in this film are basically more or less what I've been doing for the past few years since I was last at Yidstock. And for some reason, there it is, I see it. Okay. All right. Here we go.
A man of a certain age told me something I wrote and performed consisted too much of complaint. He warned that an audience with the expectation of entertainment would not abide it for very long. Unfortunately, my words were never for him in the first place, or the nebulous audience he summoned for the purpose of dismissing me. No, my words were the piquant complaint of generations, some 400 years, after which God took notice, responding with a mighty hand, an outstretched arm, great terror, signs, and wonders.
Seine Träume auf die Schulter, wickeln sich wie Triebe Tränen. I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger, a traveling through this world. But there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.
My name is Anthony Russell, Anthony Mordecai Tzvi Russell, and I'm not terribly fond of binaries. But because that is the way in which so much of the world has organized itself, has organized its experience of others, I was obliged to think only in binaries. This, of course, created its own binary, the period of my creative life organized into binaries, and the period of my life that is endeavored to be free of them. Over the past 8 years, my work has been primarily as an advocate, educator, and activist for the inclusion of Yiddish language and culture as a relevant facet of modern Jewish life and expression. All this intentionally paired with and informed by sounds and texts from my own Yerusha, as a black person presenting the possibility of creating work in this uniquely diasporic culture space, where the Jewish diaspora interfaces with the African one to create art of unparalleled richness, influence, and dynamism. It is in a world comprised of these cultural in-between worlds, to put it more succinctly in Yiddish, a Welt mit Weltlech, that I speak and perform from, with the purpose of inviting others in to find parts of themselves there. My work as a performer, composer, and writer is the elucidation of expressive continuities between my identity as a black queer man and the performative contents of black and Jewish culture. In an earlier part of my life, I managed this by using Yiddish Kunstlieder as a medium of self-expression. This has developed into an ongoing project exploring musical and textual spaces where black and Jewish expression are experienced simultaneously, not for the purposes of easy conflation. Conflation, of course, being a compromise of thinking in binaries, but in order to create a space of expressive and creative achdus, Einigkeit, unity.
Wow. So I guess you've had a lot of time to think about things.
Yes. I've had some time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even before I think everybody had time to think about things, I started thinking about things.
All right.
It was, I think, in late 2019 that I started writing, which is not something that I'd really been doing much of before. And first that sort of started out as sort of like lyric essays, reflecting on my experiences being a black guy who performs in Yiddish. Because I've had some experiences, let me tell you. So basically, that started out in a piece that I published in a publication called Protocols, called Dispatches. And what they were like kind of little sorts of vignettes of my experience being a Yiddish singer, because I was approaching my 10th year as a performer of Yiddish as I was writing this. And I actually have a little bit that I can share with you. This is number 4. In a shul on the Lower East Side, a man named Gedalia is interrupting a performance. He delivers an impromptu lecture on the concept of a Yiddish tam. I cannot tell if he is giving it to me directly, previously the performer, or to the rest of the people in shul, previously my audience. Standing at the bima, I wonder at what point for him I had gone astray. Was it as soon as I had opened my mouth? Gedalia asked me, "Have you ever heard of a Yiddish tam?" Later, I will concede that the sound of his interruption was more readily recognizable as having a Yiddish tam. That to him, it sounded more authentic. So it was kind of like in writing that I started to begin to explore, you know, kind of what my experiences had been as a performer of Yiddish, but also kind of what my relationship was to Yiddish culture, what my relationship was to what I was doing, and the ways in which it sort of interacted with my life and my own history as a performer and as a black person in the United States. In 2020, as it progressed, in the wake of protests on account of the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and numerous others who had been killed at the hands of police violence, I began to engage even more sort of directly with my sort of place as a black performer of Yiddish. And one of the ways in which that happened was an article that I wrote for Jewish Currents entitled Translating Black Lives Matter into Yiddish. And how this happened was I was floating around Twitter and I saw a Twitter thread where they were trying to figure out how to translate Black Lives Matter into Yiddish. And it was going to some places that, as a black person, I didn't necessarily think were the best way to go, translation-wise, if I can be honest. So I didn't say anything, but it turned out that a really good friend of mine, and if I'm not mistaken, a former student of the Yiddish program here, Joanna Boyarin, contacted me on the phone and asked if I was interested in being involved in a project that consisted of figuring out how to translate Black Lives Matter into Yiddish. Not only that, but also a number of phrases that were involved with the protest movement that was happening. And I said, of course, I'd be interested in doing that. And we created this document, and when it went live, there were a lot of people who were really interested in viewing this document and using some of our suggestions language-wise. I want to be clear that when we made this document, it wasn't in a dictatorial fashion. We weren't telling people how they should use these words. We were merely giving suggestions that involved a number of considerations that we had had as a committee around talking about black people and a protest movement in Yiddish in a way that felt like respectful, because Yiddish is not the only language in which this is the case, but there are many languages in which this is the case. Words that are used to talk about black people often have been moved into the pejorative, and Yiddish, of course, is no exception in that case. Curious thing, I was talking to Dimitri and the band members of BAMO this afternoon about this. It's the same thing with the word Jew. Oftentimes in many languages, the word for a Jewish person has been moved into the pejorative. It might not have been intended to be that way. But
Even
that's
in
how
English.
Even in English.
Yeah.
Yes. So I really wanted to find a sensitive and responsible way of doing it. What that ended up being was not, I think, the most linguistically beautiful way of doing it, because it's a complicated, word, and these are complicated things. The ones that we came up with, and I want to make sure that I get them right, so I'm going to read them, was Afro-Amerikaner Lebens haben eine Welt. Afro-Amerikaner Lebens seien wichtig. And my favorite, Afro-Amerikaner Blut ist nicht kein Wasser. Blut ist nicht kein Wasser, of course, is a Yiddish idiom saying, like, life means something. Like, blood is not water. So Afro-Amerikaner Blut ist nicht kein Wasser felt like, to me, a very sort of authentic way of expressing this idea within the idiom of Yiddish. I thought maybe I would read just a little bit of this, just to kind of give you a taste of some of the considerations that were involved in putting this together, because it was a bit of a project, and there were people who were very critical about it in about 1,000 different ways, as you can imagine. 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and when it involves blackness, even more opinions, surprise. Okay, so the choices behind the construction of a phrase like Black Lives Matter in Yiddish are deliberate and imperfect. To some degree, the imperfection is the point. Developing a new vocabulary is a constantly unfolding process. I fully anticipate criticism of the phrase as unwieldy, needlessly politically correct, and inauthentic. I have already seen one heritage speaker of Yiddish critique the decision to Yiddishize the word black and African American, writing that Yiddish already has an established word for black, schwarze. They say that the word is not pejorative any more than using a word to describe an object that is black is pejorative. Others have said that the issues with the word are in fact issues with American racism and not with Yiddish itself, as though the two can be cleanly separated, or racism has only existed among American speakers of the language. They insist that these American circumstances should not inform how they speak their Yiddish. As a black Yiddish speaker, this strikes me as disingenuous at best and heartless at worst. Why value the expediency of a word over the possibility of denigrating another human being? And yet I can acknowledge the fact that for certain full-time Yiddish speakers, as opposed to a performer like myself, the utility of a phrase like Black Lives Matter in Yiddish is negligible. Though it uses words in their language, it addresses concerns decidedly outside their experience, exterior to their lives, their communities, their Yiddish. This phrase in Yiddish, like me, comes from the outside, as much as the word schwarze comes from the inside. Over the past couple of days, I've had to consider who a phrase like Afro-Amerikaner Lebens sind wichtig is for. Perhaps it's for people who want to express their solidarity with the sanctity of black life in a language they have reclaimed, or perhaps have always spoken. Perhaps it's for Ashkenazi Jews who have begun to do the work of eroding the effects of American racism, or for those who have persisted in doing the work and would like to see it as continuous with the works of previous Yiddish-speaking generations. Curiously, as I write this, I realize that among all those worthy people, this phrase is for me. For someone who has previously avoided making any bold self-assertions in his adopted language of parnosa, livelihood, and artistic self-expression, I've done so much living through the Yiddish language, and now I have words to declare that this living, this life, matters.
And the response?
Oh my God, all over the place. A lot of people were very supportive. It's probably the one thing that I've written that has been the most read by people. I think Vox, as a publication, put it on a list of things that were must read like the week that it came out, so a lot of people are reading about it. There's a lot of criticism from various places, but I want people to know that anything involving Yiddish, as opposed to race, is something that has a lot of criticism. Anytime anybody articulates themselves in the Yiddish language, there's always someone there to tell them that they're not doing it properly. And with this particular subject, is no different than any other. But ultimately, I think it was good because, in a sense, it was an exercise about thinking about what blackness would look like in the terms of the Yiddish language, and like maybe what those considerations might be. Yeah.
And do you see any evidence of it having made or making inroads into, are people using these terms?
I think people at the time were using it. I think some people who've written about it in Yiddish used our terminology. I mean, that was ultimately like the idea, is that if people were specifically writing about this as an issue, and if people were writing about the protest movements that had sprung up, that they would use our document in a way that would help them to be able to articulate that, you know, in a way that made sense. Actually, I was involved in an effort to try to get Yiddish speakers who had attended protests to write about their experiences of attending those protests in Yiddish. So I had Zachary Schollenberger and Sarah Feldman write about their experiences of going to these protests, of interacting with police, of being tear gassed. I was thinking about like a previous history of political engagement and protest amongst Jews living in Eastern Europe, and how we had a history of reportage, sometimes from diaries and sometimes in the Yiddish press. We had language to talk about what that was, and when you read it, you have the experience of being there. And it felt really important for me to have people who were Yiddish speakers to be able to sit down and write in Yiddish about their experiences of taking part in this historic moment. So those writings were published in Ingeweb, which is an amazing journal of Yiddish studies, as you can see. And I wrote an op-ed in Yiddish and it was very hard. I had never written a composition in Yiddish since I had taken, Yiddish at the summer program at Tel Aviv University. So it was a little bit like being a 12-year-old and writing a book report. There was a large stack of Yiddish dictionaries helping me do this, but luckily I was helped in this effort by Zachary Schollenberger, who is like a comprehensive Yiddish speaker. He writes poetry in Yiddish. I would love to be able to read this to you in Yiddish, but I don't think we have the time because it would take me a very long time to read what I've written in the Yiddish language. So I'll just give you a little taste, a shmek and a lek, as my father-in-law likes to say. The air of protest in Yiddish has the distinct feeling of another time and place. The streets in Allegassen are particular streets. The police in Hey Hey Deloy Polizei speak Russian. The barricades of Barrikaden are from a sepia-toned image of Jewish Lodz. For many years, we have sung these songs together with a unique energy, a particular kind of éclat, assisted by the fact that these police are adherents of a czar who was toppled long ago. But today, the barricades are in American streets. The police speak English. Today, with David Edelstadt, I ask, people, who will free you now? Where is he, the beautiful hero? If we have ever sung these songs with even the briefest moment of intention, we have a responsibility as the custodians of a history of progressive Jewish protest to support our neighbors, our friends, and our families in the struggle against systemic racism and white supremacy in our communities, our country, and our time. Presently, we are all victims of two simultaneous plagues that will not depart from our midst without solidarity of purpose and action that have been the pride of our history, our songs, and our continued existence. The funny thing is I realized reading that is that I can hear all of the Yiddish in my brain. I remember using the word, a custodian of a history of progressive Jewish protests. And I remember okay, so what's the word in Yiddish that I need to use? And I said, a shamus. A shamus von, a Geschichte von Jiddischer Protest, right? It was weird because I could hear words coming together in these combinations that made sense in Yiddish, and I can still hear them reading the English. It's a little strange.
Did you write it out in English first and then translate
I wrote
it?
most of it in English and then translated it into Yiddish. But some parts I did write in Yiddish. There were like parts of it and sentences that I wrote in Yiddish because I had enough Yiddish to be able to do that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I also wonder, in the work, in the mental work that went into all of this, going back to the finding a term for Black Lives Matter, but addressing all of these issues and what you just read, did you discover or rediscover or learn, draw upon, I guess is the best way to put it, find anything or things in the American Yiddish cultural tradition going back to, at least the early 20th century to draw upon?
Yeah, I mean, this was a part of my project, and as a project, it became much more relevant. So the New York Workers' Circle invited me to come and work with them, but we weren't exactly sure what I was going to do when I got there. They were like, well, we want to find a way to have a discussion about systemic racism and anti-racism, but we want to find a way to do it that feels germane to who we are as an organization. Now, they are a social justice organization, but they're also a Yiddish language and culture organization. So a part of the challenge was how do we have conversations about systemic racism, anti-racism, and not have it feel like it's this thing that's coming from outside of the world of Yiddish language and culture. We don't want it to feel like it's being sort of superimposed on top of it. And the way in which I decided to do that was by creating a conversation series where specifically we would look at different artifacts of Yiddish culture that specifically, explicitly discussed the phenomenon of systemic racism in the United States. So the first one that we discussed was a play from 1935 entitled Mississippi. It was a dramatic gloss on the Scottsboro Boys' trial. It was the most popular play in Poland in 1935. It was in Yiddish, and it was performed all over the world. So this was my initial entry into kind of this history of discussing systemic racism in the Yiddish language. After that, we looked at Yosef Keller's poem, Wenn ich wollte in Alabama sein, which was specifically a Soviet Yiddish poem that was written about the American civil rights movement. In the poem, Yosef Keller is saying, like, he wants to bodily be a part of a civil rights protest. The meaning behind it, in a sense, is that he cannot, one, because he's in the Soviet Union, but also he can't protest as a Jew, like, against anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. So he found a way to sort of talk about that as an issue by talking about the civil rights movement that was happening at the time. And then finally, we discussed numerous, like, years and years and years of conversation about the issue of race in the Yiddish press. There's a lot of writing about racism and about race in general in the Yiddish press of the first half of the 20th century. There's a lot of conversations about things happening in the American South, about racism in the North, about black people doing the Great Migration from the South into urban areas in the North. So that was another way in which we could talk about this issue of systemic racism through the world of Yiddish language and culture. I think part of it is that there are some people who are like, as Jews, like, how do we have this conversation about anti-racism and, this kind of thing? And I wanted to say, like, well, I don't know, ask your great-grandparents. They were obviously having this conversation in any number of different kinds of ways. Like, you can't tell me, like, we don't know how to have this conversation. Like, it was very hard to pick up a paper where they were not discussing the issue of racism and systemic racism in the United States in a Yiddish paper. I mean, in many cases, they were surprised. And there was a lot of solidarity, both ethnically and politically, that was spelled out in the pages of these publications. And I wanted people to know about that and to be inspired by that and to really sort of interact with that and know that that existed and that we could take that as a model for how we were going to do solidarity work in the future. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm going to try a deft little turn
Please.
here, and whether or not it relates to what you've been talking about so far,
Yeah.
I'm curious
Well,
about.
you did ask what I've been doing since we saw each other last.
Right.
And I haven't only been talking about racism. I mean, it's a lot of what I've been talking about in Yiddish and English and otherwise, but yeah, I've had other things I've been doing.
Well, what I want to get to
Yeah.
is the music
Of course.
that you've been making.
Of course.
And so what have you been doing? I'm curious if this has, had a connection to the music you've been working on?
It has a little bit. I started very deliberately sort of working on, I think, sort of a genre of expression I would call Black Yiddishkeit, which was, like I think I said in the video, was me really trying to find a way of combining elements of Ashkenazi Jewish culture and Black culture in a way that made sense to me. If I'm going to paraphrase the Haggadah, made sense to me, but not necessarily to you. So that involved all kinds of different, types of music that I've composed. I've composed nigunim that I thought combined elements of wordless song from, Black historical sources and traditional nigunim. It's a project that I've just been working on increasingly. What's really interesting is while I've been working on that, I've also been working on a very long-range project with my collaborator, Dmitry Gaskin, I don't know how many of you were here in 2018 when we did our first concert at Yidstock, but we've been working together for a number of years, and basically our project entitled Zwei Brüder involved us writing original songs set to modernist poetry and performing them for appreciative audiences like yourself, and really sort of like making, thank you, I'll take scattered applause, and really like using it as a way of sort of exploring different genres and exploring our creativity. And I'm very happy to say that these years of work have finally culminated in an album entitled Cosmopolitan. Actually, let me see if I can, let's see. Aha, there it is. So, that guy is me. There's Dimitri and Matthew and Misha. And basically, in this album, Dimitri took a number of these songs that we wrote together and arranged them for a number of musicians, including the musicians of Bamela. And so we've started, we finally recorded it in the middle of a pandemic, which was really scary, but it all managed to come together. And we're going to be performing these new arrangements that Dimitri has written at our concert tomorrow. And should you wish to do so, you can actually take it home with you, not only today, but even tomorrow after the concert, where there will be even more copies of which to do that. So what I thought might be fun is having a chance to sort of listen to some of the earliest versions of these songs. So what usually would happen is I would find a poem that I really liked in Yiddish, and I would transliterate it, usually badly. You'll hear some mistakes in my Yiddish in this earliest version. And then I would write a draft of a song, and then I would send it to Dimitri. Dimitri would usually be in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I would be in the Boston area. So I would sit down with my iPhone, and I'd get on the piano, and I'd kind of try out this song, and then I would email it to him, and we'd go back and forth and back and forth. And sometimes I would fly out to the Bay Area, and sometimes he would fly out to Boston, and we would spend all weekend writing songs. So if you're curious what that sounds like.
Kind of like Lennon and McCartney.
Totally. This is a song, In der Fremd, and this is the very first version of it. This is from like 2017. This is what it sounded like when I first did my first pass at it.
Ob ganzen Welt, ich frag nicht wieviel, gewinn mit Leid und Träumen reich, gewinnt noch dir, wie's bringt das Schiff, nach Kies werden von dem Teich gebängt, also wie noch ab Himmel der Dunkel welche freien Lach, wie's die Bleikheit von der Himmel noch meistens rhythmische von Glas.
So I only learned piano well enough to be able to graduate from college. So I hope you'll forgive my piano playing. This is what it sounds like in Dimitri's new arrangement.
Ob ganze Nacht
Ich frag nicht wie viel gewinn mit Leid und Träumen reich. Gewinnt noch dir, wie's bringt das Schiff noch Kilschwellen von dem Teich. Gebänkt azoi wie noch hab Liebe der Dunkel welche Freudenlock. Wie's bringt die Bläugheit von dem Himmel, noch Weißes rhythmische von Glock.
So if you want to know what the rest of that sounds like, so as you can see, Dimitri's quite good at turning a straw into gold, I believe the phrase is. Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
We only have a few minutes left.
Okay.
So we have time for probably just a couple of questions. If anybody has, raise your hand. I'll call on you. And yes, back there.
Mm-hmm. So this is a really great program. The way that I encountered a number of the writers who we've set in this project is I was a Wallace Annenberg Helix Fellow with an organization titled Yiddish Kite, which is based out of LA. And it involves putting together a cohort of artists and scholars who for a year are comprehensively educated about the history of Jewish Eastern Europe and its co-territorial peoples. So I was a fellow in 2016, 2019, 2017. And in 2017, after a number of months of getting to know each other and learning about Jewish Eastern Europe, we took a trip to Belarus and Poland, specifically to interact with the physical places where Yiddish culture had been created. And one of the things that we studied the most was the poetry that had been created in Jewish Belarus and Poland. So I went to Bobroisk, where Celia Dropkin was from. We were in Grodno, where Leib Naidus is from. Leib Naidus actually wrote the words to the song I just played. Avram Reisen. We just interacted with all of this Yiddish poetry, and we were in the places where it came from. Like, it was amazing to read a poem about, a Belarusian lake, and then to be there at the lake, and then to read the poem and know that we were looking at the exact same places where these writers had been inspired. So that's how I interacted with, that's how I got to know all of these poets. I tell you, within a week and a half to 2 weeks after getting home, I wrote my very first setting of a Yiddish poem, and I was also cooking borscht every other day. I was a true believer, let me tell you. So that's a little bit how it started, and once Dimitri was in on it, we were just going through these anthologies and reading all these poems, and we would send each other poems, and we'd be like, oh, we love this, let's do this. Oh, we love this, let's do that. And it just kind of opened up this world of Yiddish expression to us, and we've been inspired by that all the way up until today. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I wish I had a really great answer for you, but I think everything that I've been talking about and reading is how I make sense of it to myself. It's a completely unfolding project, figuring out exactly what the boundaries of that is and what that looks like for myself. I mean, if I can give you an example, at the very beginning of my career, I had a performance at the Sholem Aleichem Kulturzentrum in the Bronx, and somebody was at this performance, and they wrote a letter to a friend, and they described me as der schwarze Anthony Mordechai Russell mit ein Earringel in ein Ohr, which means the black Anthony Russell with an earring in one ear. Still is the case. So that's how I used to describe myself, because I did not have any sort of language to describe myself to a Yiddish-speaking audience that would make sense. With absolutely no compunction, I said, Azoi, ich bin do, Anthony Mordechai Russell, der Schwarze mit den Earringel in Ohr, right? I don't think I really had much of an idea of like the fact that it could have been perceived as being pejorative, or that I was using a pejorative to describe myself. I just knew that I felt like I needed to have language to be able to talk about myself in Yiddish. So over all of this time, it's been this like constant sort of journey and picking through things and figuring out like what I think I resemble and what I don't. It's been a project. I wish I could tell you like, I know exactly how I explored the things, you know, X, Y, and Z, or, you know, Aleph, Bet, Gimel. But my work is like the way in which I sort of do that. My work is the way in which I sort of explore what the boundaries are, or try to push the boundaries, or try to like get rid of boundaries. And like how much I might need, you know, to delineate this is me in my black idiom, or this is me in my Jewish idiom, or this is me in my black Jewish idiom, that completely changes from piece to piece and from time to time. Yeah, of course.
That's a great answer, by the way. But I think it really also just speaks to creativity in art for any artist, for
Right.
any, you know, anyway. Yes, there.
Yes. Yes. In American Yiddish, correct. Right. Mm-hmm. I think it was pejorative back in those days, because because I've talked to people about, here's the thing, there's no way I could have gotten up and written an article about translating Black Lives Matter into Yiddish without having a lot of people who've spoken Yiddish, heritage speakers, academics, this kind of thing. I've had conversation with them. And there are other words that were used to talk about black people that weren't just Schwarze. It's kind of complicated to explain it, because the respectful word that was used in Yiddish to describe the word Negro basically sounds like the N-word. So I'm not going to say it. You can run to your Yiddish dictionaries and look it up yourself. But I think it was pejorative. I think it was pejorative. Yes. Mm-hmm. In Yiddish publications, I'll just go ahead and say it. In Yiddish publications and in writings, like the word neger, which is Negro, was the word that was often used as a respectful way of referring to a black person. So, I mean, is that a word that would have been used casually by somebody talking about somebody who was employed by them? Probably not. Yeah, but I think it was also used in a pejorative fashion. I mean, really quickly, this is something to look up. Not only was it used pejoratively, but black people knew that it was used pejoratively. And one of the ways in which I know that this was the case was I happened to find, I think it was like in 1985 or 1986, Eddie Murphy was had come back to SNL to host SNL. And he tells a joke about buying a house in Long Island. And he comes to the house in Long Island and he finds out that the house is haunted by a Jewish ghost. And how does he know it's a Jewish ghost? The ghost walks up to him and goes, "Boo, boo, what are you doing on my lawn, you schwarze?" Which is like, and people were laughing, but like the only reason why that joke would have been funny was because the word was pejorative. If the word was not pejorative, the joke would not have been funny. And he was telling this in 1985 to a New York audience in SNL. He knew it was pejorative. They knew it was pejorative. It wouldn't have been a joke if it wasn't pejorative. So, I mean, in any case, let me tell you, it's very hard to chase somebody around and say, I know you think that word is pejorative, but it wasn't pejorative in 1945. It's like, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what is anyone supposed to do with that? I want you to know that you like, what you're bringing up totally makes sense. And I'm on your side. Like, I've had this conversation with you, basically. I just think, like, for now, if we're going to speak in Yiddish in 2022, maybe there can be some considerations around how we talk about black people in Yiddish. I don't, like I'm saying, like, you telling me that does not feel adversarial to me. You're apprising me of the fact that, like, in the history of the language, it might have been used very differently, which is the case. Yeah.
Anybody else? One more. Yes.
Ooh. Oh, Lord, do we even have the time?
What was the question?
What first drew me to Yiddish? Long story short, I was sitting with my husband. If you didn't know, I'm a Rebbitzin. And I am. I want you to know in my house I'm not baking the challah, he bakes the challah, but who's lighting the candles and who's setting the table and who's making the food? It's me. I am a Rebbitzin, okay? And I want to wish you good Shabbos. Anyway, my husband and I were sitting in a movie theater in Rockland County, and we were watching A Serious Man, and at some point in the movie, somebody throws on an album, and out came the beautiful, euphonious voice of a bass singing in Yiddish. And I remember thinking, oh, that must be Paul Robeson, because that's what it sounded like. And a few years later, I decided to figure out who it was, and it was Sidor Bolarski, who was this amazing singer. He was born in Ukraine in 1898, and like me, he was formerly an opera singer, and then decided to spend his career performing Yiddish Kunstlieder, so Yiddish art song, all over the world. And I adopted his repertoire in 2011, 2012, and the rest is history. And when I say it's history, it literally is that, thanks to Yiddish, when you put Anthony Russell into Google, I am the very first thing that comes up. And I need you to know, there are very many Anthony Russells in the world before I came. One of them is a criminal. One is the former Bishop of Ely. One is a character actor. But no, on account of Yiddish, ich bin der Kopf. I am...
Anthony Russell, #1 in Google for Anthony Russell. So, Anthony Russell, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you here. We can't wait, I know I can speak for everybody, to hear your music tomorrow.
We've got gorgeous music for you. Please come. It's really going to be lovely.
Thank you all again, and we now need to clear the room for the next...
Alle Kinder Geherois. Alle Kinder Geherois.